final roundtable of the series on the publishing system with Animal Behavior Live. Just a reminder that this series has been published by the University of Sussex Research Knowledge Seed Fund. And today we will discuss the inequities created by the current publishing system with Professor Jaap Phumthue at the Institut Pasteur of Bangui in Central African Republic, and Dr. Christiana Lajes, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right, who is an associate professor at the University of Minho in Portugal. So Professor Jaap Phumthue, you are a public health expert at the Institut Pasteur of Bangui, and you wrote a commentary on the future of academic publishing, which was published in Nature Human Behavior in 2023, in which you talked about decolonizing publishing. So my first question to you is, what prompted you to write this commentary?
Thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you for inviting me to join and to share some of my perspective. It's come out of frustration of many scientists I've been working with, mainly in African countries, and people who are doing good research and they have good results and they would also like to tell their story. But unfortunately, they face a lot of barriers. And then we met at some point, and whenever I go to a conference or I meet some of my students or trainees, and it always comes up. And I say, why not take that opportunity and share so that together we can find some solution? And I'm happy to be here today because I think there is a movement that is going on to break some of those barriers so that different scientists, regardless of where they're coming from, they are also able to tell their story. We are not yet there, but I believe that during this conversation, we will have some good opportunity to discuss on some solution.
Hopefully, that's the aim of this event. So in this commentary, you wrote that there is a lack of recognition of the key roles of Global South researchers by their counterpart from the Global North, including the scientific contribution that they provide to implement and disseminate research. And therefore, they are stuck in the middle of authorship lists, or they do not appear at all. So would you explain to us how come the leadership is taken by Global North researchers over Global South researchers?
Yeah, there are many factors. The first one is, where the money is coming from. The money is coming mainly from the Global North. Therefore, they set the research agenda. Most of the time, they will be writing the protocol, and then the scientists in the Global South will be in the position to implement the research. That's one. Two, when the results are produced, usually the analysis and the writing, the actual writing, is led by the scientists from the Global North. And when you look at the guideline, the ICT-GME for authorship, you will see that there is an emphasis on the people who design and then who write. So those who have been critical on generating those data, on working the field, most of the time, they are not well considered when it comes to positioning. So it's not only a challenge with the scientists, but it's also a challenge with the way the entire environment for publishing is set. So there is a need to challenge that. Someone who is in the field, who is actually collecting the data, collecting sample, running some tests, why is he less valuable than a person who have not been in the field, who will simply, in bracket, write the article? And when we did the review out of 1,000 articles for research done in Africa on HIV, TB, malaria, Ebola, Salmonella, and Borrelia ulcer, we realized that out of 10 articles, only 3 or maximum 4 will have an African scientist first or last authors. And you even have 10% of them where you won't find any African scientists in a research implemented in Africa. So that's really something bad, let me put it that way. But the good news is that quite a number of journals have taken upon themselves to ensure that this does not happen. I've seen some article that was just rejected at the editorial level because there were no African scientists. While the study was happening in Africa, you will wonder how have they managed to do that. So the entire process, it's evolving, and we need to push even further. But pushing further for me is by equipping the scientists so that they are in position to run the analysis, to also write. Most of the time, the language could be a barrier. And by language, I mean not only French, Spanish, and English, the actual scientific language. Not everyone has been trained and well equipped to write on those language. So this is a barrier. But we believe with what we are seeing with the AI and so on, those barriers are being broken down slowly by slowly, which will give more space, more opportunity to those scientists to also write the article, be in the good position, because the person who lead is the first or the last. And we like to say in Africa that until the lion have their own historian, the history of the hunt will always support the hunter. So if the scientists don't have the capacity to write the article, to tell the story, the result and the finding will not be always addressed to the community.
Well, thank you for this. And I'm wondering, wouldn't be a part of the solution to, from the get-go, when writing the funding application, to put the collaboration with universities based in Africa?
Yeah, we've published an article where we present what we call the Douala Equity Checklist. Douala Equity Checklist, it was in PLOS Global Public Health. And the idea of that checklist is how can we strive toward equity, more equity in research and partnership. A set of 20 questions that the two entities will ask themselves, one in the global north, one in the global south. The question before you start the study, at the time of the design, question that you ask to both institutions during the implementation and after the implementation. So to come back to your question, at the time of the design, in the budget, there should be provision for that. Provision to ensure that the people who are in the field are also trained in analysis, in writing, that they should also have budget so that they can go and present the result in different fora, including international, because in some cases, not always good enough, in some cases, you will see that the result will be mainly presented by the, let's say, international scientist or student. But if it's planned from the beginning, from the time of the design, then when we come to the time of producing the result, it will be easier because it has been planned, like we did with University of Yale and also Harvard, where we ensure that our scientists from Uganda or from Cameroon had the opportunity to present in the US at the ESTMH, their poster or their presentation. That was planned already in the budget. Same thing for the article, to plan that, okay, this is how we are going to distribute. We have this article that has to be led, but really led by the Global South scientists. This outcome will be led by the Global North scientists so that there is an equity and everyone find themselves. But at the end of the day, we should always ask the question, why are we publishing? Are we publishing simply to increase the number of articles in our PubMed? Are we publishing to change the policy, the strategy? Are we publishing to inform the different communities, including the community where the study has taken place? Because you may have a good study, you publish in Nature, in Lancet. Let's say you've been doing a research on malaria in Niger. If you have those good results that are present and published in those high impact factor journal, but where the community in Niger have not got the outcome of your research, your impact is around zero because you have not impacted the life of those people. So it's always important to ask ourselves, why are we publishing, and to ensure that the result and outcome reach the community we really want to serve.
That's a great point. It's actually in the conclusion of Christiana's paper as well, and I wanted to come back to it. So maybe we will come back to it later. But you mentioned the language barrier, which I think is something that is spread in the global south, that people are not comfortable writing or speaking English, even though they have a great level in English, they don't feel comfortable communicating in English. I know this is the case in South America, for instance. So what do you think is the solution to this problem?
There are many solutions. The first one is that we acknowledge that there is a problem. Because quite a number will tell you that now English is the lingua franca, so we need to deal with that. Yes, it's a lingua franca, but by acknowledging that there is an issue of equity, when we have conference, now we'll have more and more translation. Because someone who is presenting in a different language will lose up to 70% of its capacity. So it's important that during the organization, we allow people to present, to discuss in the language. So the organizer should move toward translation. Now, the second solution now in terms of publishing article, the AI is a game changer. Recently, we published an article on language from barrier to enabler in terms of global health and publication. And this article was published in 6 to 7 languages: French, English, Spanish, Swahili, and so on. And this has been possible in a very short time because we use AI. So we produce the first article in English, and then we translate in all those different languages. And of course, we send to some people to review and to ensure that the translation was good. So this is a real game changer. So that because at some point it brings some equity. Myself, I'm not an English speaker. So when I write an article, it's important for me to have a native English person to review it. But now also with the AI, I have the opportunity to use DeepL or some of those platforms, which can ensure that the language correspond to the one of the journal. So I think that is a big game changer. Yes.
Yeah, that's something we're thinking about for Animal Behavior Live, our organization as well, because that's something from the get-go that we were confronted with. But we are still looking for the solutions with AI to be able to translate live, because I don't think we're quite there yet. But so there was a final point that you mentioned in your commentary in this paper, where you wrote scientific skills for writing grants and publications are heterogeneous in the global south, owing to lack of training, mentorship, and opportunities to gain this knowledge. So you mentioned organization involved in global health should lead training in mentoring programs to strengthen the scientific communication. Here you're mentioning global health because that's your expertise, because you are a public health expert. But what about other disciplines, and what about general solutions for this problem?
Yes, I think whether we are talking about global health or any other, the problem remains the same. It's about the will. Are we willing to give fish or to train people how to fish? This is the debate. So that are we going to invest funding on training scientists, whether it's global health or something else, on how they should write and look for the funding? And this, most of the time, you won't find them that money in project. It's really organization. Sometimes the Gates can support some. I know the African Academy of Science, also some of those organizations who are really minded to equip the scientists to have those training. I think it is critical. Without that, it will be difficult to change that imbalance, to change that inequity. They need to be equipped so that they will look for the same fund, but also, and even more important, they will have the ability to look for those funds locally, because we are not tapping enough on the funds that are available in Africa, for example. We need to find the right words, the right ways to engage those African philanthropists so that they can also contribute the same way as Gates and others are supporting. So those training are critical to put ourselves out there in global, but also at the local level.
And you were also mentioning collaborative platforms in your commentary. I don't know if you remember. So can you expand a little bit on that?
Yes, this is my dream. This is the village. The village, it's a platform that rely on AI to meet people who are looking for support, so the mentees, and those who are mentor, who have time, who are experienced to share. Why did we create the village? I was talking in the beginning how we were having those young students and scientists working from the global north and the global south. But this type of matching of student, we found a lot of limitation and even frustration because we could not scale. The people I will pair are people within my network. And we ask ourselves, how can we create a platform where you merge LinkedIn, which is a professional platform where people will put their CV and so on, and Tinder, where people are going to have to create some relationship. So you use the strengths of AI to match people based on their needs. You go into the village that is being developed, and the village, you ask your question, what is your dream? For example, you say, okay, my dream is to advance my research in malaria because I see that a lot of people in my environment are suffering of malaria, which means you need partners to support you in terms of funding, in terms of training, in terms of things. And it will go through the entire platform and look for the people who can support you in one way or the other. And the idea of is using AI also is to break the language barrier. I was talking about translation. You write in your language, and I say he, but the AI may be she, we don't know, will find the right match, the right partner, the right mentor who will come to support you around a project. And because you are looking for support to answer a challenge that you are facing locally, it's also an opportunity to decolonize global health. Because then the research agenda is set locally, and people come to help you on trying to address a problem that you are facing in your environment. Maybe the solution can come from different places, but they will have to be contextualized. So the village, it's growing. We have more and more people. We are making the platform more and more robust. And we believe that by the end of this year, we'll have an MVP that will be more publicized so that we have more and more people who can join. And as it is machine learning, as we go, we'll keep on improving the capacity of the village.
So I can give you the name of a platform which partly answers your needs, I think. It's called crowdfight.org. And it's some colleagues from my previous lab who
Crowd?
created this during the COVID pandemic. Crowdfight.org. Um, and their role was during the COVID pandemic to try to match researchers from all around the world to collaborate and like look for solutions more quickly and efficiently. And now I think it has expanded to any kind of discipline. So it's not based on AI, it's like real humans and volunteers who are working behind that to try to match people. But that can be the start of a solution. And so I will present Said Sabet. So Dr. Said Sabet is a member of Animal Behavior Live, is also a researcher working in Iran. So he has first-hand experience on the challenges with publishing in the Middle East. And so Said, I think you had some questions to ask as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you, Gab, for these very interesting topics and your sharing your research and sharing your experience. Well, actually, as a researcher that I'm living in a developing country, I think we have so many common interests and difficulties as well in publishing our research, and especially in very high impact journals. Well, I was wondering because in Iran we have difficulties to publish our papers to how can I say journals with paywalls, article APCs, article processing charges that they are involved to process or manuscripts to be published. So because of not only, for instance, we are based in developing countries, but there are for different countries, maybe in the other countries as well, in developing countries, there are sanctions maybe that can also impact those scientific activities for researchers that based in the developing countries. So this is sometimes we submit our manuscript and then we don't receive any response from the journal because of the corresponding author is based in, well, in a developing country or with very, very specific situations. So, I mean, but also in terms of limitations because of the sanctions, limitations for any online payments. So there is no even bank transfer checking post banks or so or whatever to do payments. Even we can pay in a developing country, but still we have problems to connection with the journal and those journals with these APCs, how can I say, subscriptions or something like this. So I was wondering, is that the same in the in Africa and in the developing countries, or that you are familiar with them, or what is the situation for researchers briefly in Africa? Is that something make sense?
Yes, thank you. It does make sense. And I will say for once, we are very fortunate as compared to what you've described, because we don't have those sanctions for most African countries, which mean that we do have access to open access journal who will publish openly and freely the different article. But also even the journal that has APC, quite a number of them will have either discounts or they will completely waive the fees for article coming from a list of country that has been developed by the World Bank based on economic situation. So that is a great advantage that we do have. And the other one is also there are more and more good, let me say, good African journal where we can also submit our article, because depending on who you want to target or to address, sometimes you will prefer to publish on the regional journal than a global journal. So we have those opportunity and facilities. And I will say that for those journals, most of the time, it's the originality of what we want to publish that comes first. So if we submit a great article which makes sense, they won't even charge us in most cases. So I will say, to respond to your question, that we are really fortunate on the access. However, for the journal that have APC, sometimes it's quite frustrating for some of us. You publish in one of those journals, the article is available for, let's say, 3 months or 6 months, and after, people have to pay. or you know that most of the time it may take time for your article to be relevant to some other scientists. And by the time they want to access it, it's not possible because they have to pay. And in many situations, young scientists, university or academic won't have the means to pay in those journals. So there is still some ongoing battle, but with a lot of improvement.
Yeah, and I really like your suggestion about the scientific communication. So if we can provide or some kind of, this would be a start point to think of, at least for building up a community of developing researchers from developing countries in the Middle East and maybe in Africa, and then we can share our experience with these situations and help each other. So I think this idea is very great, and I really appreciate it that you suggested this idea. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move to Dr. Lajes. So Dr. Lajes, you are an associate professor at the University of Minho in Portugal, and you co-wrote the paper Challenges in Conducting and Publishing Research on the Middle East and Africa in Leading Journals, published in International Marketing Review in 2015. And the purpose of this article was to identify the reasons for and implications of the paucity of Middle East and Africa-based studies in leading journals in your field, which is the marketing field, with a specific focus on the challenges in conducting and publishing research in Middle East and Africa. So similarly to my first question to Professor Yapum Tu, I would like to know what led you to undertake this study.
Hello. Hello, Natasha and everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I found it really interesting because it's animal behavior, right? So once you start talking in this context, I wouldn't expect a person from marketing to be invited for the discussion that is relevant for animal behavior. So that's the beginning of an excellent interdisciplinary cooperation that cuts across health, marketing, and all the other disciplines. So that was what I realized with this invitation, and that's the reason why it's so interesting to participate and to hear about what Professor Yap said, what Said said, and what is my experience, because at the moment I'm working in Portugal, right? But I worked in England for many years, and a lot of my academic career was there. So the sort of resources I have and I had access there are very different from the ones I have at the moment. So it's quite interesting, and thank you for the invitation. And in relation to your question, why were we inspired to write this article? Actually, it all started, and picking up on your point of South America that you mentioned earlier, Natasha, we read an article from Fastoso and Whitelog. At the times, they were the editors of International Marketing Review. They were mentioning the lack of research in Latin America. Okay, we read the paper. I really liked the paper, and we started. A colleague of mine from Slovenia came and visited me at the time in Loughborough, and we started brainstorming about potential ideas of what sort of research we could conduct in international marketing. We both liked the article, and we started to realize that actually there was an actual gap of research in international marketing, in particular in Africa. Then we expanded to the Middle East, also because at the time there was the definition of these two regions was not consistent across different authors. So we decided to work on this Africa and Middle East together, and the two regions together. And actually, I already had worked with people from the Middle East, in particular from Egypt, and I had colleagues from Africa. So all of this together led to a development in the interest of why is there such little research in these two regions? How can we justify this? And that was where we started. It was our original research question, as you mentioned previously.
So in your study, you conducted a systematic review of the literature on marketing research in the Middle East and Africa, which resulted in a final sample of 125 articles. And you contacted the authors of these articles by email and asked 4 questions. So the first one was, what are the major challenges involved in conducting research in the Middle East and or Africa? What are the major challenges involved in publishing such research in high-quality international journals? What would you recommend to future researchers who want to gather data in the Middle East and or Africa and later publish those results? And what are the most common reviewers' comments specifically relating to the country of your study? So you managed to contact 60 scholars and 42 responded. So that's quite a good sample size, I would say. I'm not an expert in marketing, but it seems like a reasonable sample size. And so I'm going to focus on questions 2, 3, and 4 because I think they relate more to the topic of the roundtable on publishing. But from the answers to the second question, what are the major challenges involved in publishing? You picked up 4 topics that emerged from your study: data validity and reliability, generalizability of the results, editors and reviewers' low interest in the regions, and their limited knowledge. So could you expand on this a little bit?
Yes. So as you rightly pointed out, Natasha, we came up with these 4 themes. The first one was data validity and reliability. So what we noticed is that a lot of the Delphi respondents mentioned the fact that most of the measures in marketing have been developed in the Western world. But actually several of these measures do not make sense to respondents in the Africa and the Middle East, even if the translation is conducted appropriately. So for instance, they would say that if you try to translate love and like into Arabic, that would be the same word. So even the language issue, like Jaap mentioned before, also came up in our study. At the same time, from previous literature, we knew that testing the validity of the concepts from Western economies in emerging markets was not adequate for publishing in highly ranked journals. There are solutions that came up, namely, for instance, triangulate results with multiple data sources. But the reality is that reviewers will typically question the quality of the data, the reliability, the validity, the completeness, the representative, and so forth. So clearly, in our study, we noticed that there appear to be a bias from the editors and from the reviewers towards publishing research based on the approaches prevalent in the US. And everything was being measured versus the US and what they do in the US, right? And from the moment that they know where the data is coming from, there are potentially some prejudices that the data is not as valid and as reliable. So we even question, should the measures, rather than being adapted from the Western context, should they be developed originally in the Middle East and in Africa? But at the same time, would the editors and reviewers care? Okay, which leads us to the second point, that was generalizability of the results. So by talking to the authors, one of the main issues that we realize is that one of the questions that they would get, picking up also on the next point of editors and reviewers' interest in the regions, was, why is this problem of your country so interesting for our readership? Or it's not really interested. because our audience is a US audience. So for instance, bringing in Said, why should we think that the results that we got from Iran will apply in other countries? Or the Middle East is very heterogeneous. How can we generalize the results of your study to other results? So the sort of questions that probably would not come up in a US study or a UK-based study, they did come up in the Middle East and Africa. So one of the solutions is obviously the cross-country studies, but with that it comes all the financial implications, resources implications, and so forth. The other point that you mentioned, the last point, was really the limited knowledge about the regions from the editors and the reviewers. And I think that at the time that justified a lot their position in relation to these submissions and potentially some of the preconceptions that they had. So at the time, some of the authors told us that actually that should be seen as an opportunity. The fact that there weren't so many studies in these regions and use that as the selling point of the paper. Focusing on topics that are not, for instance, prevalent in other regions like the US. I also read about, for instance, the relationship between marketing orientation and performance, that it's much weaker in the US than it is, for instance, in some of these countries. So things do change and things potentially work differently for these countries. But above all, people need to be aware that these countries, what these countries are, how they are different, and how the fact that we might have different or similar results can contribute to the overall knowledge. And this goes for both. It goes for the editors and it goes also for the reviewers. But I would say it was the editor's role, in more specifically, to push forward this research agenda of the Middle East and Africa, and it still is, I believe.
So, as I mentioned, you asked the authors of this paper themselves what they would recommend to other researchers who want to gather data in the Middle East and Africa and want to publish them. So could you let us know what the authors' recommendations were?
Yeah. So we sort of summarized that in the paper, and some of the topics that came up as problematic was the fact that researchers in the Middle East and Africa, they had tight budgets. So one of the solutions that we proposed that could be a solution for that problem would be establish governmental budgets allocated to sponsoring PhD scholarships in highly ranked international universities, as well as one-year PhD study abroad. I can say that this sort of solution could work because I have seen it working in Portugal. Many years ago, there was an investment from the government in providing PhD scholarships, and there was a huge increase in PhD, people with PhD abroad. And now we can see that the job market is very different potentially from what it was 10, 15 years ago. So the idea is that these people would go abroad, they would get training, they would foster from early on international collaborations, and then they would come back and conduct research in Africa and the Middle East. Also, the people who already work in the Middle East and Africa could establish themselves affiliations or institutional links through potentially the platform of AI. Nowadays, it's much easier that we were discussing, ideally with worldwide recognized universities, and establish, for instance, exchange visiting scholars programs, like Portugal has one with MIT. We call it MIT Portugal. So, you know, these are crucial, these sort of cooperations between countries with different levels of research and different knowledge. Also, one of the things that came up was the issue of when these people would come back to the Middle East and Africa, that their tenure and promotion decisions should be based on, for instance, a successful application for international grants, not only local grants. They should be competing at the international level. They should be measuring their output at the international level, and they should be applying for the international grants. Another suggestion that was made in terms of getting data from companies in the Middle East and Africa was developing relationships, researchers developing relationships with managers of local and international companies, and in particular multinational companies, through academic expert talks, student projects, consultancy projects, so that the managers later on could sponsor the distribution of a valid and reliable academic survey, for instance, in a company. I did this for my PhD in the UK. It worked very well. So this cooperation between academia and industry needs to be tighter. We need to learn from each other. They need to learn how to conduct research more accurately and more reliably. We need to learn how the language works in practice, for instance. And also these managers could later on teach their employees. So this relationship could be a long-term relationship between companies and researchers. Also, they suggested that we should combine data with secondary data sources, but secondary data sources that were international recognized, like the World Bank, national statistics offices, and so forth. And this is connected with the reliability and validity of the data. So the data is there, but many times it is questionable, the quality of the data. And so that I don't take much more of your time, just to wrap it up and connecting to the first point I mentioned. I think the best way would be really to find local researchers, to find international collaborators with experience in publishing in high quality international journals, so that they understand the rules of the game, but also, for instance, how to have access to more recent literature, which we noticed was complicated in some countries in Africa. Or they could potentially complement their sample with a Western sample. So by cooperating, they could collect the data in a Western sample and a Middle Eastern or African sample. So there is a lot to do. There is hope, but I think we need to be, Middle Eastern and African researchers need to be proactive in establishing these links and trying to address these critiques that emerge.
Thank you for this. So I'm still waiting for questions in the chat, so I will mention what I mentioned earlier about your conclusion, Dr. Lajes. So in your conclusions, you wrote, to this point, we have sought ways to encourage scholars from the investigated regions to publish in high-quality international marketing journals. However, they might not wish to publish in these journals for various reasons. The first one is because these journals are not heavily read by local researchers, and there is no incentive to publish in them if the work will not be recognized by their local community. So that's what you were mentioning, Yabum, too. And secondly, international scholars from developed countries have shown little interest in performing research in the Middle East and Africa. Most research to date has been undertaken by local scholars who were educated either in the USA, UK, or other developed countries. It is time for a change among leading international marketing journals and international scholars towards recognizing the importance and uniqueness of these regions. And this spoke to me because I worked a little bit in Uruguay as an intern. And I was young back then, but I was already conditioned by the Western way of thinking about publishing. And so I asked my mentors what was the strategies for publishing their research in high impact journals. And they told me that they did not publish in high impact journals because it was not of interest for them. They only published in local journals because what they cared about was for their colleagues to read their research so they could share their results and have discussions about that. So I was wondering, Said and Boom, what are your thoughts about this? Do you agree with the author's recommendations of Dr. Ladge's study? Maybe Boom, you can start.
Yes, I will agree and highlight there is no exclusion. It's not one or the other, it's actually both. Because depending on your argument, depending on the people you actually want to reach, you will prefer a local, regional, or global level. We wrote an article on the indirect costs, for example, where we are arguing that bodies like NIH or Gates will only provide 8% of indirect cost for research activity happening out of the US. But when it's a US institution, it can go up to 80%. And you know that the indirect cost is what can actually help an institution to grow. So if you want to make such a statement, it's not in Africa that I'm going to publish. We publish that one in the New England, for example. Now, if I want to inform the African community about how we manage COVID at the regional level, then I will choose Journal of Public Health in Africa. And last but not the least, publication is not only in scientific journal. We also publish in newspaper. Why? The politicians, who are the people who are making decisions, they don't read the Lancet. They don't read those high impact journals. They read the daily newspaper. So at some point, if we want to push a strong argument, as Christiana was mentioning, you need also to be present in those local journal, local platform, where the people from the community will read your publication and they can challenge. They can challenge the mayor, they can challenge the minister to say, okay, we've seen that there is an availability of new tests for malaria. Why don't you buy them for us? We've seen that there is an outbreak of Mpox. What are you doing against that? So it's really depending on the target that you will choose the way that you will choose the journal to ensure that you can deliver your information.
And Said, did you want to comment as well?
Yeah, well, actually, I also agree with Yap and Christiana in terms of it depends for instance, in my research field, it depends to your own research questions and also the topic that we are interested in. Sometimes it is very local and for instance, we have endemic species which we are interested to improve their, for instance, reproduction condition or survival rate. So it depends to local journals to be updated and to know about the condition of estimation of the population of these species, for instance. And also in my case, for instance, I can say sometimes we need also not only publish in international journals as a kind of educational outreach, we need to publish in our own language. Sometimes we need to publish our research in our language to develop the kind of science that we are working in our local universities, that they maybe speak in our language, for instance, in Persian or Farsi, not in English, for instance, maybe. And also sometimes research question is more general and developed. So it means that it can be found in other countries or even in other continents. For instance, migration of different species between continents. So we need to provide data from different countries, and then we need to, I think, maybe publish it more broadly internationally to make it available for other researchers in developing, at least in developing countries in other continents. So in Africa, in the Middle East, we have shared common research interests, and then we need to kind of at least publish in local journals that are shared in the Middle East and in Africa, or even more broader. So I really agree, and it depends to the research question or aims and the local or global impacts of our study or research. Yeah.
So we are still waiting for questions in the chat. Well, actually, there is Laure Cochard, which is also a member of Animal Behavior Live, who said, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. But I would encourage the viewers to ask questions because our roundtable will finish soon. So now is the time to ask your questions. In the meantime, I have one question that I think journals will come with this answer when people working in the global south will say that the APC are very high and that they can't afford it. Journals have these schemes to help researchers from the global south to be able to publish in their journals anyway. But does it come with issues still? I'm very unaware of this myself.
Actually, no, there's no issue. When you submit your manuscript, you can select an option where you will say you are asking for fee discount or waiver in case your article is accepted. And usually it's not a condition for your article to be accepted or rejected. Once the article is accepted and then you've been, let's say, award or discount the fees, then you will have your article free of charge. Now, if you are not, the scientist is not based in the South, but you are just contributing, then the lead institution can also either ask for waiver or pay for the open access. Because sometimes you have big institutions, they really want to make sure that the results are available to the entire community. So they will sponsor. It's quite expensive. It can go up to 5,000 US. But sometimes they will do that because they estimate that the message is strong enough, good enough to make it available for all the scientific community.
Just building on that point, Natasha, I have seen in the UK and in Portugal, for instance, Elsevier establishing cooperations with universities that if you publish in specific journals and you belong to that university, then the article becomes automatically open access. And I think that it's crucial. We should go towards open access to the knowledge, because that's the reason we are creating it. As Jaap mentioned, the AI and the ability also to translate into 7, 8, 9, how many languages we want would make a huge difference. But what I have seen is that at least in the UK and Portugal, that is really my experience as an academic, is that you are seeing more universities paying for this open access, which has a huge impact in terms of research dissemination, and it should be promoted overall and globally.
All right, so we finally have one question from Laure Cochard again. It is not only the publishing system that have to change, right? As a young researchers, we are pushed to publish in such big journals as we need them to have a chance to be recruited and have, and have a real job at some point. The way people recruit in the universities and other research places have to change too. They give too much importance to big journals and where we have to pay most of the time.
Can
I? Please go ahead.
I would say, and it has been 17 years, I think, since I finished my PhD, that one needs to choose an institution that one fits in, work fits in terms of values and so forth. And therefore, it is important to be aligned with what the institution stands for and what we want in our academic career and so forth. And we need to think about the things we can influence and the things we cannot. So when you're starting your career, I would say to some extent is your choice which university you go to, right? And all your decisions will have a consequence, whatever that is. Yes, it could be potentially advisable that there wouldn't be universities that are so research intensive and so forth. But I have seen in the UK, it's a big market. There are many universities, but there is the Russell Group and the others. And the good news is that, for instance, in that market, you have different types of universities. If you're more interested in teaching, you go to a teaching university. If you are more interested in research, you go into a research university. But I'm talking about a reality that I'm not sure if it's the same in the Middle East and Africa. But what I would say is that when you start your academic career, it's important also to know where you would like to be and how would you like to work and how the future of organization aligns with those values. Because then if they are aligned, probably you would be much happier. I'm not sure if I answered the question. It was more food for thought, potentially.
Yeah, Boom, you wanted to comment as well.
Yes, I will agree with Christina about the way she ended with the future. And when you look at the future, we'll have to adapt and to adjust. In our environment today, the journals are ranked by impact factor. So your article, you will rank it based on the journal where you publish and the number of citation. But things are changing. Now people are looking the number of views, the number of like on Twitter, the number of reposts, the number of time it has been viewed on TikTok and others. So I think things are moving and we will have to adjust because the community we are targeting is also changing. So what is true now may no longer be true in the 2, 3, 4 years that are coming, because our community will not take all the time you are taking to read a long article. So the word I will let you with is the ability to change.
Thank you for this. We have one final question from Sayantan Das. What does the panel feel about alternative publishing model such as peer community in? And they add, Animal Behavior Live could perhaps create a PCI animal behavior. I'm not sure we are quite there, but we will keep this in mind.
Yeah, I think it's Syed at some point who was mentioning, and all those big journals started as a community journal. The New England Journal of Medicine was based on people in the New England who want to share the outcome from the finding from medicine. So each community will have the opportunity to design a platform. And that also, when I was talking about the village platform, at some point, it will also be a place where people can publish. Publish means telling their stories. It might not be on PubMed or Rank, but at least people will have the opportunity to share their findings. Maybe in the language, it will be translated by AI, and people will have I'm just thinking about the idea of a free market. where idea can just flow. And this is what we are thinking for the future. It doesn't mean that we won't have those big journals. I think at some point we'll have both. And depending on the message you want to send, you will choose which platform fit to your message.
All right, I think with these words, we will end the roundtable. Thank you very much, both Christiana and Yapum, and Said as well, for joining this roundtable today. I would like to remind everyone that our annual conference is coming soon. So if you haven't registered yet, you should. The conference will happen on the 4th and 5th of November. The conference is entirely free and registration is open until before the conference. So you can check our website for more information. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Natasha.
you. Thank you for inviting. Bye-bye.
Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.